Chapter 313 U Reunion 6. The memory of that moment vividly resurfaced. An order came down to deal with someone digging into the organization's traces. They said he might be a troublesome expert, having earned the notorious name, Sickle-Slaying Demon, for cruelly killing people with a sickle. So I made full preparations, but when I actually met him, it was beyond my expectations. I wondered who was snooping around, but to think it was a teenage brat who hasn't even been weaned. He was young. Not even of age. Moreover, contrary to the order from the organization, "You bastard. You haven't even learned martial arts." And martial arts? You don't even know what martial arts are? Huh. The brat hadn't even learned martial arts. It was truly fascinating. Assuming he had learned martial arts, I struck his abdomen with the power of 3 stars. This level of attack could make even a supreme expert suffer internal injuries and possibly die, yet this brat without any internal energy endured this pain. Interesting. A brat who hasn't even learned martial arts is still alive after taking a strike from me? Kook, what the hell are you? Stab. Ugh. So I stabbed a sword into his belly. Even if one hasn't learned martial arts, there are those born with innate divine strength. This brat might have been that type of person. In that case, there was no need to keep him alive. Killing you now would save me from future troubles. Skewer. Thep. Koo. Not satisfied with stabbing his abdomen to make sure, I pulled out the sword and stabbed it into his left chest as well. You should have just lived quietly. Why did you have to act up and hasten your doom? Oh heck. I tossed the bastard aside like that. There were many eyes watching and I figured this was enough for him to lose his life, so I left. But how could something like this happen? The moment he took off his human skin mask and smiled, the memory of when I first saw the bastard resurfaced. The sight of him grotesquely laughing while killing people in front of the burning village overlapped. Sickle-Slaying Demon. Li Guang's pupils trembled violently. It was unbelievable, but I had the thought that the bastard might be alive by heavenly luck ever since seeing him at the Heaven and Earth Society. It was because the face was identical. As I tracked his traces, the conviction that the bastard might be alive grew stronger. Among those who had contact with the bastard, no one suspected him based on appearance. But they all said something about him seemed different. Especially those who had contact with the Wooden Eyes swordsman. However, since the bastard lost his life at the Forbidden Guard selection tournament, I thought it was no longer an issue to worry about. No, until just moments ago I absolutely couldn't connect him to that bastard. This doesn't make sense. This was something that couldn't happen according to common sense. No, it was completely impossible. The bastard hadn't learned martial arts at all. Unlike others, I directly confirmed this myself. But what is going on? It hasn't even been half a year. It was astounding. If he had reached the level of a third-rate or second-rate martial artist, I would have said he had talent despite starting late. This wasn't an issue that could be dismissed with mere talent. Tremble, tremble, tremble. The trembling of his hands intensified. I prided myself on being a senior member in the organization and had faced quite a few monsters. But this existence before my eyes was lacking even to be called a monster. Is it possible to reach the 6th heaven, known as the peak of the martial world, from nothing in less than half a year? Anyone who heard this would find it absurd. This is a dream. For a moment, Li Guang wondered if he was dreaming. Then Mok Jiangun spoke. We finally meet, but the reaction is different from what I expected. What? Are you not happy to see me? At Mok Jiangun's words, Li Guang was momentarily at a loss. With such an incomprehensible pace of advancement, he was on the verge of doubting if this bastard was really that bastard. How could he be happy to see him? Putting everything else aside, he was the very person who stabbed a sword into the bastard's heart. In a situation where it was obvious the bastard would see him as an enemy, welcoming him was nonsensical. At that moment, how can this be? Guyong Sao, the 8 Poison sect leader and patriarch of the Guyong clan, also couldn't hide his astonishment. He naturally assumed it would be the 6 heavens top figure, but when the human skin mask was removed, a face even younger than now, no, not even of age, was revealed. No matter how he looked, he appeared to be only 17 or 18 years old. What was going on? Could it be that this extraordinary person had undergone rebirth or returned to a youthful state? The puzzled Guyong Sao soon asked. Who are you? Who knows? Who could I be? This person seems to know me best. Mok Jiangun smiled and looked at Li Guang. Then Li Guang spoke with a trembling voice. You bastard. What the hell are you? This is something that absolutely cannot happen. Don't tell me you deliberately pretended to be dead back then. Unable to comprehend Mok Jaeongun's tremendous pace of advancement, Li Guang shifted his thoughts to the idea that he had been practicing martial arts from the beginning. Otherwise it was hard to accept this. At this, Mok Jaeongun shrugged. How could that be? I really almost died back then. Thanks to you. Swish. With that he slightly raised his hand. Then the black sword that Li Guang had dropped, looking as if it had been charred, floated up and flew towards his abdomen. Slash. Li Guang tried to take a step back from the rushing sword. But his feet wouldn't move. No matter how unusual the sword was at this speed, it wasn't impossible to dodge it. However, he was so shocked that his body wouldn't move. As his belly was about to be pierced. Whoosh. At that moment, a powerful energy infused with green poison flew in and blocked the black sword. The one who unleashed the poison was of course Gyeongso. Since I owe you, I was going to give you at least one hole in your belly, but you're interfering. Mok Jaeongun clicked his tongue and smacked his lips. At this, Gyeongso hurriedly shouted. Come to your senses. Are you going to keep being like this? No matter how strong the opponent was, what difference was there between being in a daze and baring one's neck waiting for death? At his shout, Li Guang snapped out of it. Kook. He had lost his fighting spirit for a moment due to the incomprehensible sense of relative deprivation. Coming to his senses, Li Guang circulated his internal energy and instantly raised his martial power to 10 stars. Since he had reached the transformation realm, having surpassed the wall, the speed of his energy circulation was extremely fast. Boom. Using sword fingers to create a sword energy, he assumed a sword-pointing stance and shouted, Elder. We must attack together. I had the same thought. Swoosh. Judging from Li Guang's reaction that persuasion through words was impossible. Although his identity was unknown, Gyeongso also reawakened his 8 poisons and steeled his resolve. The opponent was a peerless master on par with the 6th heaven realm. Only by attacking together with the determination to fight to the death did they have a sliver of a chance to survive. They exchanged glances, about to seize the initiative, when Mok Jaeongun lightly waved his hand. Boom. Then the surrounding true energy surged and the air felt different. Wondering what he had done, Mok Jaeongun said, I've blocked the sound within a radius of 5 jang using qi. Block the sound? Why would he do that? Waiting for an opportunity to launch a joint attack, they couldn't hide their puzzlement. To them Mok Jaeongun said, I'll give you just one chance. Chance? What the hell are you talking about? A chance for you two to survive. What? At Mok Jaeongun's words, Li Guang furrowed his brows. What kind of scheme was this? This bastard would consider him who had stabbed a sword into his abdomen and chest as an enemy. Moreover, he had revealed his identity as if he had been waiting. Li Guang glanced at the true energy filling the surroundings and the masked individuals fighting outside with Mok Jaeongun's subordinates. Is this something even his subordinates mustn't hear? Otherwise there would be no reason to block the sound. Li Guang discreetly glanced at Gyeongso. Meeting his eyes, Gyeongso nodded as if to say they should listen for now. No matter how skilled they were in the transformation realm and poison arts, their chances of winning against an expert of the profound realm were extremely low. If there was even a slight room for negotiation, there was no reason to refuse. However, to make it clear, Li Guang said, I pushed you to the brink of death. And you're giving me a chance. At these words, Gyeongso looked at Li Guang with surprised eyes. How did Li Guang push an expert comparable to the 6th heaven to the brink of death? It was incomprehensible. What on earth happened between the two of them? While he was puzzled, Mok Jaeongun chuckled and said, If I wanted to kill with that, I would have killed you earlier instead of having this conversation. At Mok Jaeongun's words, Li Guang bit his lip hard. This bastard had become incomparably stronger than before and was looking down on him. However, he couldn't strongly deny it. If Mok Jaeongun had properly raised his martial power when he struck his abdomen earlier, it might not have ended with just vomiting. You seem quite upset. You should have definitely cut off my head back then instead of stabbing my chest. Those words truly made him regret. He was angry at his complacency in thinking the bastard couldn't possibly survive after stabbing his abdomen and heart because he hadn't learned martial arts. However, Li Guang barely suppressed this and said, You mentioned giving us a chance. What is it? It's nothing much. Just answer my questions kindly. Answer your questions? At these words, Li Guang and Gaiong Sao's expressions darkened. The chance he mentioned seemed to be extracting information from them. Come to think of it, the brat not only knew their organization's emblem but also seemed to know information related to their hierarchy. Handing over information to someone like him meant betrayal. At this, Gaiong Sao spoke with a heavy voice. Are you telling us to betray the organization and hand over information? Yes. You understand well. Think of it as betrayal or whatever you want. I just need you to give me the answers I want. With such a demand, did you not consider that we would fight you to the death? As soon as those words ended. Shudder. Gaiong Sao's expression froze. Mok Jun was smiling eerily while looking at him, and the overwhelming pressure of his murderous intent made it difficult to breathe for a moment. Is this the difference between being separated by a single wall? As his breathing trembled, Mok Jung-un said with a smiling face. You seem to be discarding the chance too easily. What? Swish. At that moment Mok Jung-un's figure disappeared. Unable to grasp Mok Jung-un's traces with just his senses, Gaiong Sao urgently bent his knees and leaped, spinning his poisonous palm strike towards the back with the momentum. Toad Poison Art. 7th stance, resisting tail clam palm. The momentum was like a leaping poisonous toad, enough to make an ordinary person retreat. Smack. However, Mok Jung-un grabbed his right arm, into which his powerful poison energy and momentum were poured as if snatching it. Then he twisted his wrist in the opposite direction. Crack. The broken bone protruded from the elbow of his twisted arm. Arg. A scream burst from Gaiong Sao's mouth. Regardless, Mok Jung-un grabbed his shoulder. At the same time he tried to pull his broken wrist while twisting it further. Stop. At that moment, a blue sword energy stabbed towards Mok Jung-un's face. It was Li Guang's strike. It was a strong thrust with domineering momentum. But Mok Jung-un didn't dodge at all and lightly extended his left palm. Boom. Plang. No way. Ripples formed and the stabbing sword energy was deflected by the elastic force. This was the profound principle of the scripture of transferring true qi. The moment his sword energy was deflected, Mok Jung-un tried to pull Gaiong Sao's broken wrist again. In an instant, Gaiong Sao hurriedly struck Mok Jung-un's chest with his left poisonous palm. Bang. It was a poisonous palm strike with the power of 10 stars, infused with the poison of the 8 poisons. His poisonous palm strike hit squarely, but Mok Jung-un's upper body slightly leaned back, then he straightened his waist again. At that sight Gaiong Sao's face turned pale. Despite being hit by the extremely poisonous 8 poisons palm strike, he acted as if nothing happened. No matter how profound his realm was, wasn't this too monstrous? Crack. At that moment, as if Mok Jung-un was determined to pull out his wrist, he tried to yank it again. Gaiong Sao cried out in shock. I'll talk. I'll say anything, so please stop. Chapter 314, Half Human Half Monster. 1. I'll talk. I'll say anything, so please stop. Gaiong Sao, the patriarch of the Gaiong clan, begged in shock as his arm was on the verge of being ripped off. Seeing him like this, the scarred middle-aged man Li Guang urged. Elder. Gaiong Sao's current behavior was no different from yielding to the enemy. Unlike Gaiong Sao, who was brought in by the organization's invitation, Li Guang had been a member of the organization for a long time, so this was unacceptable to him. We mustn't submit. At his shout, Gaiong Sao, holding his dislocated shoulder, cried out, Would you say the same if it were your arm, not mine? To a martial artist, not only the danjian but also the arms and legs are all precious. Losing even one of them would disrupt the balance and significantly lower one's martial prowess. That's why Gaiong Sao was trying to avoid his arm getting ripped off, even if it meant using his energy. I haven't settled my match with Tang In-hei yet, nor have I reached the realm of the 10,000 poisons body. I can't afford to lose an arm. He had yet to fulfill his ambition of settling the match with Tang In-hei and reaching the end through poison. With many aspirations, Gaiong Sao had a strong attachment to himself, so he had no choice but to cherish himself over the organization. I'll tell you everything I know, so please stop. If you had been this obedient from the start, you wouldn't have gotten hurt. I won't be arrogant. So. Gaiong Sao trailed off and looked at Mok Jung-un's hand. He was pleading pathetically as if begging him to let go. That old man Gaiong Sao. Li Guang thought it wouldn't do. Given his age and outstanding experience, he thought Gyeong-so wouldn't yield to the enemy. But since he wasn't originally a member of the organization and was invited, Li Guang didn't expect his self-attachment to be this strong. So Li Guang had to make an extreme choice. Explosive 3 swords. Li Guang used his sword fingers to perform a triangular thrust. Then 3 strands of exploding sword energy extended from his sword fingers and rushed towards Mok Jae-eun. Swoosh swoosh swish. 2 strands of the rushing exploding sword energy aimed at Mok Jae-eun's head and heart. And the trajectory of the remaining strand was aimed at Gyeong-so's head. What? Gyeong-so's expression contorted as he turned his head towards the rushing sword energy. Was Li Guang really targeting his life to silence him? Although it was the right choice for Li Guang, it was absurd that he aimed for his life without any hesitation. Swish. At that moment, Mok Jae-eun reached out his hand towards the approaching strands of sword energy. Then ripples formed in the void. It was the profound principle of the scripture of transferring true chi, deflecting the opponent's power. Clang clang bang. The exploding sword energy collided with the ripples and bent, deflecting in different directions. Crash crash boom. As a result, only the innocent surrounding buildings were destroyed. Mok Jae-eun, who had too easily blocked the exploding sword technique, looked at Li Guang and said, "As expected, it seems I need to put a hole in your belly before having a conversation with you." Damn it. Li Guang's complexion darkened rapidly. It was indeed impossible to face a supreme master who had reached the 6th heaven realm with pure individual strength. What the hell was that bastard? What did he do to become this absurdly strong in less than half a year? Had such a thing ever happened in the history of the martial world? It made all the years he had spent cultivating martial arts feel futile. Grip. Li Guang bit his lip hard and glanced at his sword lying on the ground. That black sword, looking as if it had been charred, was given to him by that person. Suddenly, the memory of when he bowed to that person for the first and last time resurfaced. A place shrouded in darkness. Except for where he was prostrating, there wasn't a single point of light, making it impossible to even see faces. A voice reached his ears. "The son of the deceased Li Sik, you say?" It was a sort of scratchy voice. But without minding it, he replied, "Yes, that's correct. Your father, who was merely in the 2nd realm, never bowed to me until the moment of his death. I am aware of that. Then why do you think I called for you?" "I don't know. Did you swear to inherit your father's mission and devote your life to me?" "Yes. Loyalty passed down through generations. Even though humans can't live for even 100 years, I like this aspect of them." "Pardon." "Enough. It was just a monologue." Stab. As soon as those words ended, something fell and stuck into the ground in front of Li Guang. It was a black sword that looked as if it had been charred. It was a sword with a crude shape, lacking even luster, but Li Guang was captivated by the strange energy emanating from it. "What is this?" "It's a special gift for you." "A special gift?" "Yes. Very special indeed. What do you think it's made of?" "I don't know. You said you learned swordsmanship from your father, but your insight is lower than I thought." Slightly provoked by those words, he answered, "Is it made of black iron?" "It's not made of black iron, perennial steel, or anything like that. If it were, it would have been easy to refine." "Then what is it?" "Didn't I tell you to guess?" At those words, the young Li Guang hesitated before touching the blade with his hand. His father greatly valued the resonance with the sword. That's why he wanted to feel the sword directly and sense what was contained within it. As Li Guang touched the blade, slice. His hand was cut. Apart from the charred-looking tip, the blade itself looked crude, but unexpectedly, it was sharp enough to cut without even slicing. But the moment the blood touched the sword, tremble, tremble, tremble. The blade trembled violently as if it were alive. Along with it, a strange energy was felt through the part in contact with his palm. It was an immense ferocity. Roar. At that moment, Li Guang was startled, removed his palm from the sword and even fell on his bottom. What the hell? What was that just now? It was too vivid to be called an illusion. He saw something roaring, but it wasn't a ferocious beast like a tiger or a bear. It was as if a dragon. As soon as those words left his mouth, the sound of clapping was heard. Clap, clap, clap. Along with it, that person's voice was heard. "Not bad. I didn't have high expectations, but for a young brat like you to resonate with that remnant. What is this? Rejoice. You have obtained a black sword made from the scales of a spiritual beast close to a divine beast. Spiritual beast. Yes. It is the Dragon Demon King. Saying it like this might not resonate with you. All right. It is made from the scales of a millennium-old Imugi. At those words, Li Guang's expression became half-believing, half-doubting. He had heard from his father that there were those who dealt with demons and spirits in the organization, but he didn't know it would be that person. But do Imugis actually exist? He had seen some demons and spirits, but weren't dragons creatures that only existed in legends and imagination? Seeing his puzzlement, that person said, "Cherish it dearly. In your most desperate moment, it will become a great source of strength for you." The most desperate moment. Li Guang, who had been staring intently at the black sword, reached out his hand towards it. Then the sword floated and flew towards him due to his true energy. Grab. Li Guang grabbed the hilt of the black sword and looked at Mok Jiangun with slightly tense eyes. At this, Mok Jiangun removed his hand from Guyong Soa's twisted wrist and pushed him aside. Kook. Then walking towards him he said, "Fortunately. I was hoping you wouldn't just submit. No matter how much I offered you a chance to live, I wanted to pay back the debt appropriately. Indeed, my judgment back then was correct." "What was?" "You are a bastard who must be killed." In less than half a year, the young brat who hadn't learned martial arts had appeared as a supreme master on par with the great sages. This bastard was too dangerous. More so than the sixth heaven or even the prophecy that person was seeking. Mok Jiangun chuckled and said, "You should have killed me back then." Swish. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jiangun's figure blurred and disappeared. Although Li Guang realized that he was moving at an extremely high speed, he didn't bother trying to locate Mok Jiangun. Instead, he abruptly grasped the hilt of the black sword in reverse and then, stab. Suddenly, Mok Jiangun stopped in front of him. Then, as if unable to understand, he tilted his head and said, "What a dull conclusion. Are you trying to silence yourself through suicide?" Ugh. Li Guang let out a painful groan. He had made an unexpected, impulsive move. He had stabbed his own black sword into his heart and his chest. Anyone could see that this was an act of suicide. Ah. Mok Jiangun couldn't hide his disappointment at his extremity. He had intended to make him talk after making him feel an appropriate amount of pain. But who would have thought he would choose suicide instead of yielding to force and opening his mouth? Grab. Mok Jiangun grabbed the head of Li Guang, who was staggering and about to fall backward. Then he said, "But I can't let you die peacefully. I need to hear at least these two things from you no matter what." Ugh. "If you tell me just two things, I'll send you off comfortably. The demon sword who is..." Shudder. Suddenly Mok Jiangun furrowed his brows. That was because Li Guang's eyes had turned white, becoming demon eyes. But the change didn't end there. Bulge. Bulge. Bumpy scales were already appearing on his neck and facial skin. They resembled the scales of a snake. What was this? This bizarre transformation? As he was puzzled, Li Guang's teeth became sharply pointed, and his energy also changed. This energy wasn't internal energy. His true energy was transforming into demonic energy. Could it be? Mok Jiangun glanced at the black sword stabbed into Li Guang's chest. With a hunch, Mok Jiangun grabbed the hilt of the sword. At that moment, a violent evil aura explosively surged up, strongly rejecting Mok Jiangun and pushing him away. Bang! Mok Jiangun's body, slightly lifted into the air, landed 8 steps away. Pushed back, Mok Jiangun looked at Li Guang with narrowed eyes. In the eyes of Mok Jiangun, who had opened his ghostly eyes, the demonic energy explosively increasing behind Li Guang was taking shape. Just how high level was this demonic energy that even its aura was taking form? Roar. Black horns protruding like a deer's, a fiery red dorsal fin. A giant body with scales extending like a snake. It was the legendary creature he had only seen in books, an Imugi. At that sight, the corners of Mok Jiangun's mouth twitched and rose. Well, you had a hidden trump card. Chapter 315, Half Human, Half Monster, 2. Roar. It wasn't visible only to Mok Jiangun's eyes. The energy was so prominently taking shape that even Chong Ryong, who was inside the wooden puppet, could see it. White demon eyes. Black horns protruding like a deer's, a fiery red dorsal fin fluttering as if it would burn. A giant body with scales extending like a snake. Imugi. Chong Ryong spoke as if it was absurd. At this, Mok Jae-young asked in puzzlement, "Can you see it?" "I can see it. This is the first time the energy has been so prominently felt despite being inside here." Chong Ryong couldn't hide his astonishment. "So Emojis actually exist. I have only heard about Emojis, but this is the first time seeing one. Among spiritual creatures, dragons can be considered the rarest." "Indeed. But that is... It looks more like a remnant obsession rather than the Imugi itself." "Yes." Mok Jae-young nodded in agreement. Although the energy itself was strong enough to take shape, it was a remnant obsession left in the demonic energy. How strong must one's will have been in life for the obsession to materialize to such an extent? Anyway, judging from the remnant obsession and the surging demonic energy, Li Guang's transformation seemed ominous. "It doesn't seem like we should just leave him be." At Chong Ryong's opinion, Mok Jae-young smacked his lips. "If I kill him right now, it'll be done." The ominous energy spreading out gave a sense of pressure and wariness, but now, while he was transforming, was the perfect timing to deal with him. If there was nothing in particular to ask, he would have immediately beheaded him. Right at that moment, the trembling has stopped. Li Guang, whose entire body was covered in scales, seemed to have completed the transformation as the trembling disappeared. The explosively surging demonic energy was also gradually stabilizing. One peculiar thing was that the black sword stabbed into his abdomen was sticking to him as if it had become one with his body. Then someone's voice was heard. "What in the world is this?" It was Gyeong Sao, the patriarch of the Gyeong clan and the 8 poison sect leader. He seemed perplexed by the sight of Li Guang, who had stabbed a sword into his own abdomen as if committing suicide, transforming into a half-demon form. Right at that moment, swish. The transformed Li Guang, now half-human and half-monster, raised his head and glared at Gyeong Sao with eerie white eyes. Shudder. As his eyes met the white eyes without pupils, Gyeong Sao felt a strong sense of threat. No matter how he looked at it, that was not the Li Guang he knew. At that instant, swish. The half-human, half-monster Li Guang disappeared from Gyeong Sao's sight. Instinctively certain that he was moving at an extremely high speed using lightness skill, Gyeong Sao urgently released the 8 poison's toxic energy in all directions. Poison was like his limbs. If someone approached and came into contact with the spreading poison, he could immediately grasp their location. Swish. Someone had approached from the right, 3 steps away. As expected. Since his right arm was broken, he naturally guessed that the attacker would target his right side or back. So Gyeong Sao used his left hand to perform one of the absolute techniques of the toad poison art, the 9 formations benefiting formation. Although the power of the technique was reduced when performed with one hand, befitting his realm as a transformation expert and a poison master, he added swiftness to somehow make up for it. Swish 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 swish. The trajectory of the 9 formations benefiting formation palm strikes drawn by Gyeong Sao rushed towards the vital points on the upper body of the detected presence. However, that someone, Li Guang, who had become half-human and half-monster, lightly leaned his upper body back and avoided the trajectory of the palm strikes. Gyeong Sao couldn't help but be inwardly surprised that he easily dodged the technique by moving only his upper body. Strictly speaking, he had considered Li Guang's martial prowess to be similar to or slightly below his own. But what was going on? Unlike the bewildered Gyeong Sao, Li Guang's white eyes were filled with ecstasy. Gyeong Sao's absolute technique, which had surpassed the wall, felt slow to him. Even without using the scripture of light body, he could avoid it just by moving his upper body slightly, and he could perceive every single trajectory. Swish. Flash. Since the flow of the technique was visible, he naturally knew where to attack. Li Guang, who had leaned his head back, thrust his fist into Gyeong Sao's left shoulder with a lightning-fast strike. Thud. Kook. Gyeong Sao's body twisted in an instant as he was hit in the shoulder. Not missing that moment, Li Guang tried to stab his sharpened nails into his chest. In response, Gyeong Sao spewed out green poison from his mouth, even with his body twisted. Pooh! Splat! Li Guang hurriedly waved his hand and distanced himself from the spewed green poison. However, due to the close proximity, the poison touched his arm and some parts of his body. Sizzle sizzle sizzle. The parts of his clothing touched by the poison were directly corroded. Moreover, not only the touched parts but also the poison spread, causing most of his upper garment to melt away in an instant, showing how virulent the poison was. With such virulent poison it was expected to penetrate his body, but sizzle, sizzle, sizzle. The poison gave the feeling of the scales on his skin being burned, but they quickly recovered and instead, the ominous energy surging from within his body pushed it out. The rising green haze was proof of that. Ha ha ha. Li Guang burst into mad laughter, unable to hide his joy. Although he didn't know what it was, this energy different from internal energy and his transformed body made even poison ineffective, causing his confidence to rise sharply. It's the best. Grip. The ominous energy filling his body was overwhelming his existing internal energy. No, it was incomparable. With this power it felt like he could do anything. Even if it was the sixth heaven known as the Great Sage Realm, he felt that he could sufficiently challenge it now. But foolish acts are forbidden. Li Guang quickly regained his composure. Although this explosively surging power was tremendous, untrained power was hard to consider completely his own. Therefore, rather than recklessly charging at Mok Jiangun with false bravado just because he gained power, it was better to kill that old man Gaiong Sao and bide his time for the future. Whoosh. Li Guang, who had made his decision, launched his body to kill Gaiong Sao. If he killed him, he could prevent the information from leaking out. In an instant, Li Guang's figure reached right in front of Gaiong Sao, who was using lightness skill to distance himself. Li Guang tried to slash at Gaiong Sao with a strike infused with ominous energy. Die old. Right at that moment. Swish. A blurry shadow blocked the way. Smack. Kicked his arm that was about to strike upward. Along with it, it spun its body and unleashed consecutive kicks. Bam bam. They flew accurately towards his face. However, in a split second, Li Guang hurriedly raised his left wrist to block them. Whoosh. Even though he blocked them accurately, Li Guang's body was pushed back nearly 10 steps. The wrist that blocked the kicks ached and throbbed. However, it wasn't to the extent that he couldn't endure it. Swish. Li Guang lowered his hand and sarcastically raised the corners of his mouth, saying to Mok Jiangun, "It's not as threatening as before." "What is? That kick just now?" "Yeah. Strangely, I no longer fear you. It means the power gap isn't as wide as before." "Is that so? You're adapting to the demonic energy faster than I thought." "Demonic energy?" "I'm referring to that power of yours." At Mok Jiangun's words, Li Guang couldn't hide his puzzlement. Despite his power increasing sharply, Mok Jiangun still remained composed. He even seemed to know what this power given by that person was. Who the hell was this bastard? Phew. Li Guang let out a small sigh. Let's discard useless worries. Even if the power has become similar, unlike the bastard, he was still in the adaptation stage. There was nothing more foolish than being drunk on power and recklessly charging at the bastard, thinking he had gained the qualifications to compete with him. Right now there was only one goal. Gaiong Sao. He just needed to kill that old man. Even if he couldn't target the Holy Fire Priestess immediately, that old man could become quite troublesome if he blurted out everything he knew about the organization. So Li Guang racked his brain. Let's pretend to target his comrades and the Holy Fire Priestess, and then kill that old man Gaiong Sao. Unlike when he saw them before, they seemed to have a pretty strong bond. Then, no matter how cold-hearted the bastard was, if his comrades were in danger, he would have no choice but to take his attention off the old man Gaiong Sao even for a moment to save them. First. Whoosh. Li Guang extended his sword fingers towards Mok Jiangun. Then a gray exploding sword energy formed from his hand, made of demonic energy, and rushed towards Gaiong Sao with a fierce momentum. Swoosh. You're being a nuisance. Clang. In response, Mok Jiangun quickly blocked it and deflected it using the profound principle of the scripture of transferring true qi. Of course, even before that, Li Guang had twisted his body and launched himself towards Mok Jiangun's companions who were fighting against some of the remaining masked individuals. They were quite skilled, but with his current self, it seemed possible to take care of one or two of them and take a hostage before Mok Jiangun could catch up to him. Swish swish swish. In the eyes of Li Guang, who was moving at an extremely high speed, the sight of the masked individuals and Mok Jiangun's subordinates fighting slowed down significantly. It was as if the flow of time was different for each of them. But right at that moment, swish, a black line appeared in the void in front of him, and something blurrily landed 10 steps ahead. It was none other than Sickle-slaying demon? The bastard. Li Guang's eyes trembled. Thanks to this ominous power, the speed at which he was moving had doubled compared to before. But how did the bastard get ahead of him? Moreover, he could see that the bastard's right hand was holding the evil commandment sword, but in his left hand. Li Guang's eyes gradually widened. If his eyes weren't deceiving him, that was clearly a severed arm. Due to the intense vibration of the severed arm held in Mok Jiangun's left hand while he was in the flow of high-speed movement, it was difficult to discern whose arm it was. Right at that moment, slice. With a feeling of something leaving his body, a burning pain struck his right wrist. Along with it, as Li Guang, who had been running with lightness skill, lost his balance. Swoosh. His body soared into the air due to the airflow formed by the sharp sword energy. Ugh. Swish 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 swish. As his soaring body rose into the air, the sharp sword energy shredded his entire body. He had been convinced that his body had become close to indestructible, with scales appearing and even poison being ineffective. Yet he could clearly feel the scales being sliced. And he could also tell that his entire body was drenched in blood in an instant. Thud. Fush. Eventually Li Guang fell to the ground. Lying on the ground, Li Guang's expression became dazed. What in the world? Judging from the lack of sensation in his right arm, it seemed that it was indeed his arm. The searing pain from the sword energy slicing his entire body made his mind hazy. Swish swish swish. Splash. Fush. Then the sound of footsteps crossing the rainwater-soaked ground could be heard. Li Guang struggled to raise his head. Mok Jiangun's appearance, emitting a ferocious black haze from his entire body as if he had become one with the darkness, truly resembled a demon. Li Guang couldn't understand it all. He was certain that there was no longer a significant difference in martial power after exchanging a couple of moves with him. But what was this now? How? To the perplexed Li Guang, Mok Jiangun spoke. Why are you surprised? I clearly told you earlier that I had used only 3-star power. 3-star power? Li Guang was momentarily dumbfounded. So did that mean he had only faced him with about 30% of his full power during their earlier exchange? Chapter 316, Half Human Half Monster. 3. 3-star power. The power Mok Jiangun had used was a mere 30% of his full strength. Of course, this was when he only used the energy of death. If he were enveloped in demonic energy like now, it could be said to be doubled instead. Li Guang spoke with difficulty, his expression perplexed. Why, you've deceived me. At that question, the corners of Mok Jiangun's mouth reached his ears. You're very perceptive. Shudder. Li Guang shuddered at the answer that didn't deny it. Mok Jiangun facing him with only 3-star power wasn't to conserve his strength or for exploration. It was simply to pay him back for what had happened in the past. You endured my 3-star power. He still remembered those words clearly. Of course, he wanted to continue this petty retribution, but it became difficult after Li Guang became one with that black sword filled with the Imugi's demonic energy. So without wasting unnecessary time, he decisively used his full power to subdue him in one fell swoop. Splash. Mok Jiangun tossed Li Guang's severed arm as if it were a nuisance. Then approaching closer he said, It must have been your secret weapon, but it's a pity it didn't work. For you, of course. You must have wanted to surprise me with your rapidly increasing power, right? Nash. Was this bastard mocking him now? Li Guang was enraged, but he had nothing to say in the face of such overwhelming power. What was this bastard's true identity? The strike that exploded earlier when his power was concentrated into one could be said to have reached the pinnacle of swordsmanship without exaggeration. Was this really the same bastard who didn't even know them of martial arts half a year ago? Flinch flinch. He wanted to move his body but he couldn't. All the muscles and tendons in his body had been cut, making it impossible to move. Strange. When he was touched by the virulent poison energy of Guyong Sao, the patriarch of the Guyong clan and the 8 poison sect leader, he felt his body push it out and recover. However, that ferocious and dark energy emanating from the bastard was scattering the energy within his body. Was that why the severed muscles and tendons weren't recovering? Is this the end? With his right arm severed and all his muscles and tendons cut, leaving him unable to move, there was no difference from a martial artist meeting his death. Li Guang was dazed with a sense of futility. Mok Jae-un approached him and said, "Are you ready to answer my questions now?" At that question, Li Guang snorted and said, "You've made me almost a cripple and you expect something to come out of my mouth? Just kill me." Now that his life as a martial artist had ended, he had no attachment to life. And he had his pride. That old man Gyeong-so might have begged for his life, wanting to live until he became senile, but Li Guang was different. "You seem to have quite a bit of integrity. Stop spouting nonsense and kill me. Old man Gyeong-so, you will soon face punishment from that person. Look forward to it." At Li Guang's warning, which sounded like a curse, Gyeong-so's complexion darkened. Although he had submitted to that monster-like bastard to avoid the immediate crisis, he couldn't help but fear the aftermath from the organization. Should I run away? Gyeong-so was inwardly conflicted. However, after witnessing Mok Jae-un's tremendous sword strike earlier, he lacked the confidence to escape. This bastard was a monster who could kill him at any time if he wanted to. As Gyeong-so's mind became complicated, Mok Jae-un spoke up. "Let me make a proposal. Stop the bullsh*t and kill. Although the regeneration from the demonic energy won't work due to the demonic energy, if you answer my questions, I'll dispel the demonic energy for you." "What?" "Right now, your body has become closer to a demon or spirit than human. If the demonic energy is dispelled, it seems like it will recover on its own." At Mok Jae-un's words, Li Guang's eyes trembled faintly. His body could recover. He had thought he was no different from a vegetable, lying there with all his muscles and tendons severed. To the wavering Li Guang, Mok Jae-un pointed to the severed arm with his eyes and said, "The arm might reattach too, you know? My arm can be reattached? It seems possible with your regenerative ability, but if it doesn't work, I can personally attach it for you. I've done it a few times, so it's not that difficult. Of course, the longer the delay, the harder it becomes." At Mok Jae-un's words, Li Guang's tongue became parched. If there was an opportunity to recover his severed arm and severed muscles and tendons, it naturally meant he could make a comeback. However, accepting this proposal meant submitting to the bastard and betraying the organization. That old man Gyeong-so didn't realize it. The extent of the organization's power. If that person wanted to, the Gyeong clan could be exterminated overnight. Even if Gyeong-so was an expert comparable to the 8 stars, it wouldn't matter. Tremble, tremble, tremble. Li Guang's body trembled. After countless contemplations in an instant, he finally reached a difficult conclusion. Kill me. He chose to maintain his integrity. Even if he could save his life at the moment, it was better to keep his oath of loyalty to the end than to be chased by the organization and meet his death. To him, Mok Jae-un smiled and said, "It seems that no matter what proposal I make, you won't answer my questions. Stop spouting nonsense and kill me. If you don't want to repeat the mistake I made, it's best to slice this neck cleanly." "Yes, of course I should. But on second thought, it seems I need to be more flexible. No matter what you say, it's useless. Kill. How about I join your side?" "What?" Li Guang's expression froze for a moment. What was this bastard talking about now? "Earlier, I noticed you were trying to persuade me, right? Seeing that, it seems you need some manpower." "Are you serious?" What was his ulterior motive? Li Guang showed a disbelieving expression. Then Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jae-un's ears. "Mortal. What are you trying to do?" "What do you mean, what am I trying to do? Saying you'll join their side, what nonsense is that?" At her question, Mok Jae-un smiled without answering. Then he reached out his hand and sucked in Li Guang's severed right arm, which he had dropped on the ground, using void absorption. Grab. Holding the severed arm, Mok Jae-un approached Li Guang. Unable to move, Li Guang could only flinch and show wariness. Then Mok Jae-un brought Li Guang's arm to the severed part. Mok Jae-un placed his palm on the severed part. Then the residual demonic energy remaining at the severed part was sucked into Mok Jae-un's hand. As soon as that happened, the blood vessels at the severed part wriggled and squirmed. Whoosh. Eventually, the severed surfaces of the arm began to reattach to each other. Even the eyes of Li Guang, the person involved, couldn't help but be filled with amazement at this astonishing sight. As the arm was being reattached, Mok Jae-un placed his palm on Li Guang's chest. Through his palm, the demonic energy that had penetrated Li Guang's shredded upper body like poison gradually dissipated and disappeared. Then breathing became more comfortable and the wounds rapidly healed. At this, Gyeongso looked at him with an uncomprehending gaze. What the hell is he doing? From Gyeongso's perspective, it was very perplexing. He had submitted, even risking betraying the organization out of fear of losing his arm and his life. But if Lee Gwang maintained his integrity, why wasn't Mok Jae-eun even considering torturing him to extract the information he wanted and instead restoring his body? Sigh. He was in a proper dilemma. What was he supposed to do now that he had submitted? As he was at a loss for what to do. There. Now if we just dispel the demonic energy in your lower body, you'll be completely recovered. At Mok Jae-eun's words, Lee Gwang looked at him with a suspicious gaze and said, "Are you giving me a carrot to deceive me now?" "No. As I said, I'm exercising some flexibility." "Flexibility?" "Yes. I've had conversations with people from your organization several times, but I couldn't obtain anything proper. I don't know if it's the same for your side, but every single one of them." Tap tap. Mok Jae-eun tapped his head with his finger and said, "Has a seal." "Seal?" Lee Gwang's eyes turned cold. Among the members of the organization, there were those who belonged to the second realm but were unaware of this truth. But Lee Gwang, who had been loyal to that person for 2 or 3 generations, knew about the seal. He himself was probably sealed as well. If he tried to say something important, his head might explode with a pop. So, aside from knowing that there are ranks like the emblem, the first realm and the second realm, there was no way to find out anything else. But the thing is, I don't really need such information. What the hell are you after? It's nothing much. Actually, if you just provide what I want, I don't think I need to have a major confrontation with your organization. What do you want? Yes. To be honest, I have no interest in who the leader of your organization is or what they're trying to do. You have no interest? Yes. I don't care what they do. Even if your organization kills all the people in the Central Plains. At Mok Jae-eun's words, Lee Gwang's eyes wavered. If the hypocrites of the righteous faction or others said such a thing, it wouldn't have had much impact. But this bastard was definitely not a benevolent type of person. Rather, he was close to being evil itself, enough to be called the sickle-slaying demon. He might be the talent that person wants. An existence that could carry out slaughter without question if an order was given. Moreover, this bastard's martial prowess had reached the 6th heaven, which could be considered the great sage realm. If he were an enemy, he would be an existence that must be killed, but as an ally, such a monstrous talent would certainly be a great asset. Glance. Lee Gwang then glanced at Gyeongso. Meeting his eyes, Gyeongso unconsciously swallowed his dry saliva with a tense gaze. Seeing that, Lee Gwang snorted. Right. That cunning old man didn't even compare to the value of this bastard. No, could they even be compared? Right. That person would also prefer this monster-like brat over that old man who betrayed the organization to save his own life. Rather, he might be valued even more for bringing such an exceptional talent. Once his mind was somewhat organized, Lee Gwang spoke in a slightly softened tone. Are you certain? That if we give you what you want, you'll join the organization? Yes. I told you, right? The reason I've been tracking your organization until now was for that purpose. I don't know what you want, but if it's an exceptional talent like you, not that traitorous old man, that person would want to bring you in, even if it means giving you a substantial reward. At Lee Gwang's words, Gyeongso's expression gradually turned pale. Even if things got twisted, how could it turn out like this? Chapter 317, Half Human, Half Monster 4. I don't know what you want, but if it's an exceptional talent like you, not that traitorous old man, that person would want to bring you in, even if it means giving you a substantial reward. At the scarred middle-aged man Lee Gwang's words, the expression of Gyeongso, the patriarch of the Gyeong clan, hardened. This was a situation he had never anticipated. He had barely submitted, disregarding the organization's aftermath and his reputation, all to save his life at the moment, but that monster-like bastard said he would join the organization. It was maddening. If no one else had been present, it might have been different. But since this happened in front of Lee Gwang, a senior member of the second realm, he couldn't take back the words he had uttered. What should I do about this? If Lee Gwang attacked him together with that bastard, there would be no chance to do anything. No, in the first place, that monster-like bastard alone could kill him. Gyeongso's mind became complicated. With his arm broken, his primordial energy was also damaged, making it difficult to even run away. Damn it. It was truly a desperate situation where he didn't know what to do. Then his eyes met Li Guang's. That fellow who still couldn't move his lower body, looked at him with a meaningful gaze and raised the corners of his mouth, then said to Mok Jun, "Sickle-slaying demon. Since you said you'd join the organization, can you do one thing for the organization? You're already making demands before I even receive what I want. It won't be a difficult task for you. And if you become one of us, it's something you must do." "What is it?" "Executing a traitor." "Traitor? Ah." Li Guang stared at Gaiong Sao, revealing his murderous intent. Seeing this, Gaiong Sao, who had been racking his brain on what to do, hurriedly shouted at Mok Jiangan, "Hey, even though I submitted to you, I did it while prepared for the organization's aftermath. But now if you come after me, isn't that going too far?" As soon as he finished speaking, Li Guang pressed. "Going too far? You old fox. How thick-skinned are you to utter such words? What? You betrayed the organization that invited and treated you well, and you have the audacity to say it proudly. This is all your just desserts. Treatment? Ha." At his sarcasm, Gaiong So showed a reaction as if he found it ridiculous. He wanted to say something but eventually closed his mouth. Right now the issue was how that monster would respond. Then, "So you're asking me to kill him? There are already many tasks to do even though I haven't officially joined yet. Please understand. Strictly speaking, you bear some responsibility for that person betraying the organization, don't you?" "I suppose so. I will definitely inform that person of your merit. So right now." Before he could even finish his sentence, whoosh. As if he had no other choice, Gaiong So kicked the ground and used lightness skill to rush in the opposite direction from where they were. As Gaiong So suddenly ran away, Li Guang shouted, "We must catch that traitorous old man." At his resounding cry, two of the few remaining masked individuals hurriedly launched themselves in the direction of Gaiong So. No. These fellows. He hadn't been talking to them, so it was perplexing that they went after him. No matter how much Gaiong So had betrayed, he wasn't someone those lowly fellows could catch even if they chased after him. Could it be? For a moment, Li Guang clicked his tongue. Come to think of it, it didn't seem like they were really chasing after Gaiong So to catch him. A considerable number of the masked individuals had lost their lives, and seeing himself lying on the ground covered in blood and Gaiong So running away, anyone could tell the situation was unfavorable. They were using the pursuit of Gaiong So as an excuse to naturally attempt an escape. So Li Guang shouted at Mok Jiangan, who was acting leisurely, "Sickle-slaying demon. If you let that old man go, the organization's existence will be exposed. If that happens, you might not be able to obtain what you want. Goodness. You're troublesome in many ways." Swish. In the end, Mok Jiangan moved. As his figure dispersed and disappeared, Li Guang gritted his teeth. If only his lower body had been intact, he would have personally chased after that traitorous bastard and sliced off his head. But he became inwardly anxious. If that sickle-slaying demon bastard caught Gaiong So, that old man, it would be fortunate, but if he deliberately let him go, that person might punish him with death. That bastard must catch him. Otherwise it would truly become problematic. Whoosh 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 whoosh. Despite suffering an injury where his arm was twisted and the bone protruded, befitting his status as an expert of the transformation realm who had surpassed the wall, the 8 poison sect leader Gaiong So was using lightness skill at a tremendous speed, cutting through the thicket. His speed was much faster than a horse running at full speed. Gaiong So ran with all his might, to the point where his surroundings were barely visible. He had never run so desperately even in his youth, but there was no other way to survive. Anyway, that Li Guang fellow can't even walk right now, so if I can just shake off that monster. A sliver of possibility would arise. While running like this, he used all the hidden weapons and even poisoned the path to hinder the pursuit as much as possible. But then Gaiong Sao's expression suddenly hardened. He had only been paying attention to what was behind him. But in the direction he was using lightness skill, a figure appeared. Damn it! Gaiong Sao could instinctively be certain that it was Mok Jiangan. Realizing it was no use, Gaiong Sao shot a powerful energy infused with poison energy towards that figure. Swoosh. Then he changed direction and headed east. It was just a temporary measure, but he had to try everything in this situation. Still, it was a powerful energy infused with the power of 10 stars and the 8 poisons, so he thought it would at least buy him some time, but... smack. At that moment, a blurry shadow appeared just 5 steps ahead of him. And that shadow quickly solidified. Oh no! It was none other than Mok Jayongun. Gyeong Soa's face contorted as he clicked his tongue. No matter how much he had surpassed the wall, he didn't know the gap would be this wide. In the end, no matter what he did, he was no different from being in the palm of Buddha's hand. Eventually, Gyeong Soa stopped, unable to hide his sense of futility. Seeing his expression that seemed to have given up, Mok Jayongun said, "Don't you have any intention to resist further? What resistance can I put up? Are you toying with me?" "Of course not." Mok Jayongun shrugged his shoulders. Then Gyeong Soa made a disgusted expression and spoke in a choking voice. "Look here. I still have many attachments to life, so I surrendered while being prepared for the organization's aftermath. But this is really too much. Do you have to kill me to feel satisfied? It's unfortunate that you have attachments to life. I had no intention of killing you." "Right." It was Li Guang's request. So Gyeong Soa spoke in a pleading voice. "Then please can't you let me go?" No matter how much that Li Guang fellow made the request for the sake of the organization, isn't a man's word as heavy as 1,000 gold? How can you speak with a forked tongue? "Well, depending on the situation, I might do that. If you're a gentleman, you should." "I'm not a gentleman, and I've never considered my words to be like gold." When even his desperate plea didn't work, Gyeong Soa was at a loss for words due to frustration and futility. It seemed like no words would get through to this bastard. At the very least, if he had a sense of righteousness, he should have released him or shown a bit of mercy, but that seemed difficult to expect. Is this the end? He had even thrown away his pride and begged for his life, but he didn't expect it to turn out like this. Even if he couldn't see the end through poison, there was just one thing he wanted to accomplish somehow. But it seemed impossible in this life. So Gyeong Soa, having given up, plopped down on the ground, closed his eyes and muttered, In the end I can't settle the match." "Match? What match? What's the point of telling you when you won't spare my life even if I do?" Gyeong Soa didn't want to become any more pitiful. He had already thrown away his pride as much as he could, and there was no need to try to look good in front of someone who wouldn't spare his life anyway. To him, Mok Jayongun chuckled and said, "Who knows? I don't have the discerning eye, so who can say if my heart will be moved? You're already trying to break the agreement you made once, so how can I trust you? If you put it that way, you betraying the organization's trust to save your life is no different, so how can I trust you? That's..." At this, Gyeong Soa tried to say something but eventually closed his mouth. Even if he had his own reasons, it was meaningless if the other person couldn't accept them. "No, you're right. Even if my life was hanging by a thread, I easily submitted and said I would reveal information, so I'm the one who can't be trusted. Then it's fortunate." This bastard's words are subtly biting. It was inwardly unpleasant, but since it couldn't be resolved by force, he endured it. Then Mok Jayongun said, "But I am curious. If you could easily betray them to the point of disregarding the aftermath just to save your life, why did you follow that organization? What are you trying to do by hearing that?" To that question, Mok Jayongun smiled and replied, "To decide whether to kill you or not. To decide whether to kill me or not. Aren't you taking my life too lightly, even if you're capable?" Gyeong Soa frowned and showed his defiance. Then Mok Jayongun folded his arms and said with an indifferent gaze, "Do you think I'm merely discussing the weight of a life? It's better to keep in mind who holds the authority over life and death." Shudder. It was truly strange. He didn't particularly reveal his energy. Yet there was a sharp sensation around his neck. Startled by this, Gyeong Soa unconsciously swallowed his dry saliva. Even though this fellow was clearly younger than half, no 1/3 of his life, how did he possess this level of weight and pressure? As he was puzzled, Gyeong Soa soon seemed to understand the reason. The caliber of a leader? This bastard was born with the caliber of a ruler. Regardless of age, those with the caliber of a ruler embrace others as a leader or a dominant figure and guide everyone on the path they have created. Gyeong Soa inwardly exclaimed in admiration. It seemed that his intimidation by this fellow wasn't simply because of power. As he was inwardly marveling, Mok Jayongun said, "Does your silence mean you're choosing death?" At those words, Gyeong Soa hesitated for a moment before opening his mouth. It might sound like an excuse if I say this now, but it was to repay a debt. Debt. That's right. What kind of debt? My granddaughter was afflicted with an almost incurable disease. Thanks to a medicinal herb called creeping rockfoil that they helped me obtain, she was barely able to prolong her life. Creeping rockfoil? Isn't that a rare herb that grows in extremely cold, snowy regions? This fellow. Gyeong Seo couldn't hide his surprise at Mok Jae-un's knowledge of medicinal materials. Creeping rockfoil was a special medicinal ingredient that not only the medicinal merchants and physicians in the Central Plains but also those in the western regions, where the Gyeong clan's estate was located, hardly knew about. Even he had barely found out about it while trying to treat his granddaughter's illness. But to think this fellow knew about creeping rockfoil, his knowledge of medicinal materials was no ordinary. Just who was this bastard? Then Mok Jae-un stroked his chin and said, "Anyway, you're saying that you worked with them in exchange for your granddaughter's life because of the hard-to-obtain creeping rockfoil." "That's right. I had no choice. Creeping rockfoil was a medicinal herb that was difficult to grow naturally in both the western regions and the Central Plains, and even I had been searching for it for a long time but couldn't find it, so I desperately needed their help. It's the life of your flesh and blood, so of course you would. But then all the more reason you shouldn't have betrayed them, right? Yes, you're right about that. But I have sufficiently repaid my debt to them. I worked for them for nearly 10 years and was dragged around too much with creeping rockfoil as a hostage." At those words, Mok Jae-un asked with a puzzled look, "Wasn't creeping rockfoil used only once?" "It wasn't just once, but she had to take it regularly and consistently. I don't know where they obtained creeping rockfoil from, but they always supplied a certain amount, and that's why I had no choice but to help them, even if it was to pay the price." There was a subtle sense of disillusionment in Gyeong Seo's voice as he spoke. His granddaughter's life was practically held hostage, so he had no choice but to work with the organization, but most of the things they did were not to his liking. Moreover, when countless civilians, not just martial artists, lost their lives due to the poison he created, his desire to cut ties with them grew even stronger. Seeing him like this, Mok Jae-un said with twitching lips, "In the end, you chose your own life over your granddaughter's." At those words, Gyeong Seo raised his voice, flaring up. "What do you take me for? Even if I was dragged around by them, I take pride in being one of the top 3 in terms of medicinal knowledge in both the Central Plains and the western regions. Oh, could it be that you found a solution to replace creeping rockfoil? You're really quick-witted." Gyeong Seo clicked his tongue and nodded. "You're right. For 10 years, I analyzed the remaining creeping rockfoil and created a medicinal material that could replace it. You were gradually preparing to cut ties with them." "That's right. In fact, although it got twisted because of you, I was going to settle things with that bastard Tang Yin-hae after this job and retire with my family." "The settlement you're referring to is with the Thousand Poisons hand Tang Yin-hae. I've been competing with that fellow for a long time but could never settle it. That has always remained a lingering attachment." The 8 Poison sect leader Gyeong Seo and the Thousand Poisons hand Tang Yin-hae were widely recognized as rivals by anyone in the Central Plains. And they too had always been conscious of each other and competed. Seeing Gyeong Seo's pure lingering attachment, Mok Jae-un's eyes turned strange. "Why don't you agree with it?" Chong Ryung asked Mok Jae-un. At this, Mok Jae-un shrugged and replied, "Who knows? You may not understand, but having a rival to compete with for a lifetime is something to envy." "Is that so?" "Of course. Even I have someone like that." "Well, what are you going to do? Sparing his life or not is up to you, mortal, but you need to consider the impact it will have later." "I should." Then Gyeong Seo, looking refreshed as if getting the secret off his chest had relieved him, opened his mouth. "So what will you do with me?" To his question, Mok Jae-un stroked his chin and replied, "It's definitely a waste to just kill you." At those words, Gyeong Seo's face brightened. "Then will you let me go as agreed?" "That's not difficult, but if I let you go, it will be hard for you to have the settlement you want while running away, and your family will also be in danger. Are you okay with that?" At this question, Gyeong Seo's expression suddenly hardened. Certainly he could save his life for now, but the organization would try to eliminate him somehow, and they would target his family members who hadn't escaped yet to find him. If things had proceeded according to the original plan, he could have quietly disappeared, but now it was thoroughly entangled. What should he do about this? Faced with the complicated situation, Gyeong So sighed with frustration. Sigh. To him Mok Jae-eun said. But there's not necessarily no way out. Are you saying there's a way? Yes. Because if you just die it will be resolved. What? Gyeong So was dumbfounded by Mok Jae-eun's answer. He talked as if there was some solution, but in the end he was saying that it would be resolved if he died. What the hell did that mean? To the perplexed Gyeong So, Mok Jae-eun said with a sarcastic smile. It's quite painful, but you can endure the pain of having your skin peeled off, right? Swoosh. The rain had weakened a bit, but it was still pouring down. Li Guang, a member of the Second Realm, looked in the direction where Gyeong So, the patriarch of the Gyeong clan, had fled with a somewhat impatient expression. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't understand. That old man was almost like having his granddaughter held hostage, making it difficult for him to betray the organization. Of course, he could submit since it was a matter of his own life, but the Gyeong So he had observed wasn't such a small-minded person. Why did he struggle so desperately to live? He even ran away. Just as he was thinking that, someone emerged from the bushes. Splash. Fush. Walking through the pooled rainwater was none other than Mok Jae-eun. As Mok Jae-eun appeared, Li Guang's gaze naturally turned to something, which was what he was holding in his right hand. Seeing it, the corners of Li Guang's mouth rose. As expected. As expected. As expected. The reason for his reaction was simple. What Mok Jae-eun was holding in his hand was none other than Gyeong So's severed head. The sight of his tongue hanging out and his dead appearance was horrifying beyond words. This bastard is really something. He had anticipated a situation where Mok Jae-eun might let him go or release him. But he had brought the head, cleanly cutting it off. Having reached the level of a great sage, he had easily caught up and executed the traitor despite taking it easy. That's fine. With this much, that person would also be satisfied despite losing Gyeong So, because he had gained an even more outstanding talent. Is this enough? Thud. Fush. Mok Jae-eun threw Gyeong So's head close to Li Guang. Despite his tongue sticking out, his expressionless face as if he didn't even know he was dead, made Li Guang inwardly gasp in admiration. He still couldn't understand this pace of advancement, but it was truly remarkable. Considering that even an expert of the transformation realm was dealt with like this. Good work. The leader of the organization, that person will also praise your merit. I don't need praise. I just hope to receive what I want. Don't worry. As long as it doesn't interfere with that person's doubts or the organization's work, he will unconditionally grant it, just as you said. I would be grateful if he does. Of course, it's natural. Then I guess this is no longer necessary. With those words, Mok Jae-eun walked over and then, squish. What are you? Before he could even say anything to stop him, Mok Jae-eun crushed Gyeong So's head with his foot. This sight left Li Guang speechless. Of course, he had directly confirmed it with his own eyes, but he had intended to take the head and have it verified. But now that it was crushed, that was no longer possible. Dumbfounded by Mok Jae-eun's hasty action, Li Guang clicked his tongue inwardly. Ha! If he were just a subordinate, it would have been a matter to reprimand him, but this fellow had monstrous potential, reaching the level of a great sage despite not even being of age. He would undoubtedly be valued by that person. They had already started on bad terms, so there was no point in scolding him over this matter and making things awkward between them. Is there a problem? No. Seeing him give up without saying a word, Mok Jae-eun's lips twitched. He had anticipated that Li Guang would react this way to some extent. With this, Gyeong So became a dead man to them, and there was no way to confirm his corpse or anything else. The image of Gyeong So's shocked face flashed in Mok Jae-eun's mind. Gyeong So asked, startled, "Why you're going to peel off my face?" "Yes." "Are you serious?" "Yes. It might be a bit painful, but if you can't sacrifice one face to break ties with them, isn't it a cheap price to pay?" "No, how the hell are you going to deceive that Li Guang fellow with just the face skin? Unless you cut off my head, he absolutely won't believe it. I just so happen to have something useful." Saying that, Mok Jae-eun brought something that was lying far away. It was the severed head of a dead masked man. While chasing after Gyeong So, he had discovered two masked men running away and had beheaded them both in an instant. "What are you going to do with that?" "I'm going to put your face on this head." Hearing this, Gyeong So couldn't hide his astonishment. "No way. You know how to make human skin masks too. Yes. It's not that difficult. Especially if I peel off the face of a living person, it's even easier. At these words, Gyeongso was at a loss for words, clicking his tongue. Just how far did this fellow's abilities go? Although he was terrified at the mention of peeling off his face, in the end, Gyeongso realized that this was the only way to break free from them, so he accepted Mok Jae-un's proposal. Of course, there was a small price to pay for this proposal as well. As a result, since Li Guang was deceived, the plan could be considered successfully concluded. Then Li Guang cautiously spoke up. By the way, since we're practically family now, can you dispel the energy in my lower body? Li Guang gestured towards his lower body with his eyes. While Mok Jae-un had gone to catch Gyeongso, he had tried to dispel the energy that kept penetrating his lower body. However, although he could release some of the energy, he couldn't completely dispel it, so his muscles and tendons still hadn't recovered. Is there anything difficult about that? But before that, can you first provide me with information about the person I want? At Mok Jae-un's words, Li Guang furrowed his brows. What was he doing, trying to bargain with his lower body after saying he would join the organization? A hint of suspicion arose in Li Guang and he said, "Do you not trust me?" "Not yet." Hearing those words, Li Guang's eyes narrowed. He had temporarily put aside his doubts, getting carried away by the thought that such an outstanding fellow joining as a talent would be praised by that person. But with the current conversation, his suspicions grew a bit more. If the fellow was pretending to join under false pretenses to obtain information, the worst-case scenario could unfold. So Li Guang cautiously opened his mouth. "I see. But it's the same for us. What if you kill me after hearing only the information you want?" "I said I would exercise flexibility. How can I trust those words? I even killed the elder who used poison as he wished for you, yet you're being quite tiresome. It's going to become quite troublesome at this rate." With those words, Mok Jae-un lightly exerted his pressure. Then Li Guang spoke with a somewhat pale face due to the pressure. "Then prove one more thing." "What more do you want me to prove and how?" "Have your subordinate send away Holy Fire Priestess first. In return, since I need your help anyway, I'll stay here with you for 5 days. At his proposal, Mok Jae-un snorted inwardly. This fellow was also using his head more than he thought. Considering that he was trying to achieve what he wanted while preparing for any contingencies. Li Guang stared intently at Mok Jae-un. If he couldn't readily accept this proposal, then the fellow's claim of joining their organization was a blatant lie. How will he respond? As he observed the reaction. "Well, if that proves it, let's do that." Mok Jae-un shrugged his shoulders and readily accepted it without any fuss. This made Li Guang inwardly puzzled. Was it just my misunderstanding? Had he been too suspicious? The fellow kept agreeing to his demands without question. Moreover, should I send her away right now? Mok Jae-un dispelled the true energy surrounding him and gestured while shouting, "Please bring the elder here." At Mok Jae-un's command, the subordinates guarding the vicinity of the residence were puzzled, but soon Seop Chun brought Holy Fire Priestess closer. However, something happened here that piqued Mok Jae-un's interest. Upon discovering Li Guang, Holy Fire Priestess's complexion darkened with a stiff face as if she knew him. Likewise, Li Guang seemed to know her as well. "Holy Fire Priestess. It's been a long time." Holy Fire Priestess averted her gaze and remained silent. Seeing her reaction, Li Guang chuckled and gestured to summon the surviving masked individuals. As they approached, Li Guang said to her, "Where is the prophecy?" At that question, Holy Fire Priestess clenched her mouth even tighter. Then Li Guang shook his head and spoke in a low voice. "I guess you couldn't find Guardian Zhang, no, that old man Mun, no?" As soon as those words ended, Mok Jae-un's eyes sharpened. "One, no. That was his grandfather's name.